Hi, and welcome once again to the weekly What Comes Next Live. Normally I'd be saying it's Tuesday afternoon at 5 o'clock UK time, but today it isn't. Today it's 8 a.m. UK time. I just have my cup of coffee, honoring how Australians love their coffee. And in the Greater Sydney area at 7 p.m., it's just getting to sunset. And she has a glass of calming water next to her rather than a cup of stimulating coffee, is my friend Vanessa Bennett. Vanessa, I met a number of years ago, 6-7 years ago, at Runnymede on the Thames in a very, very competitive group dragon boat racing event, which I hasten to add my boat won, but can't have it all. But Vanessa works for Next Evolution Performance. This is her business, her baby. And as the name says in the tin, it's about performance in humans. She'll tell us more about that. And the next evolution bit I love that she chose a number of years ago, because she's always learning, studying, learning, listening to people, and seeing what's the next evolution of how we can work better as individuals, as teams, as businesses, etc. So, and she's also been had the good fortune to be in New South Wales for the last year, as opposed to in lockdown London. So I'm feeling a little bit jealous of her being able to occasional pictures on social media of her off at Bondi Beach, having a good coffee, no doubt, or something similar. So the title on this show is pretty self-explanatory, and every guest takes it whatever direction they want. Vanessa, welcome to What Comes Next.
Thank you very much, Tom, for that great introduction. Yes, it feels like ages since I've been in London now. I have been fortunate enough to be down here in Sydney for the whole of the pandemic. I think we're doing okay under the circumstances compared to a lot of other people around the world. So we are very mindful of that. I think the main thing that it's really kind of brought home is I've never felt like Australia was that far away from the rest of the world, because I'm used to traveling a lot, but not being able to travel. Our international borders are closed. We've had a lot of time with our state borders being closed. So it does feel a little bit weird, but it's great that we've got this technology. So imagine if this had have happened 10 to 15 years ago, we wouldn't have had the ability to still be in contact with London and in the US and all the other parts of the world that we like to do business with. So very, very lucky in the scheme of things.
It's interesting what you just said about you never really had the feeling Australia was too far away. What's the nearest, apart from your rivals in many ways, New Zealand, apart from New Zealand, what's the nearest place you can fly to, and how many hours flight is it?
Well, I guess we've all got the South Pacific Islands. They're all quite nice for, 3 to 4 hours away. But probably Asia would be just a hop, skip and a jump for us by our standards. And that would be typically around 9 to 10 hours on a flight. So London and New York are the harder ones. But, just being able to have that ability to say, you know what, I can get on a plane and I can be there in 24 hours. Yeah. I never took it for granted. I always know that I've been very lucky to be able to do that. But it does seem like, wow, we're a long way away at the moment. But that's okay. Hopefully that will start to change as vaccines get rolled out and things like that.
Yeah, one would hope so. I was talking to a friend who a previous guest on this show, Alex Barker of Be More Pirate. And we were talking on the phone. We would, one of the things we've taken to doing, which I think is one of the legacies that will last from this, is people will have walking meetings where they're actually on the phone. And if they're not in the same area of a city, just go for a walk and plan it. Like, let's go for a walk while we talk on headphones. So Alex and I live in different parts of London, and we've been doing that throughout lockdown. And we are quite strictly locked down for at least the next few weeks here, and it has been since December. So we're not meant to leave out our local area unless we have a valid, good reason for doing so. And she just used the language of, I look forward to roaming further afield.
Exactly.
On Sunday, I had a valid errand to do 40 minutes drive away out into the country. And it was just felt so good to be outside my local small town for the first time. But I think there's I guess the thing I'm thinking is that there's probably a metaphor in there around looking at things close up, looking at things further away. And sometimes I've traveled an awful lot, as you have, and sometimes when I was doing all that traveling, I thought the world was pretty homogenous, right, in a lot of ways. Particularly, I'm working with businesses, I'm working with leadership teams, etc. I felt like I was hearing the same things all the time. And I wonder, when I visited Australia, I found the place I landed in, because the Commonwealth Games were on, I came to realize is very not Australian, which is Gold Coast. It just looks like the Florida Panhandle, or it's incredibly Americanized. And I thought that was so strange. It was my first trip to Australia, and I went, it's super Americanized. I mean, up to the height of the curbs on the pavement and the road signs, and yet I thought Australia would be more sort of British. But what I guess the thought for me is, what's Australian? And I just, in closing, I saw something in the travel news, which I still get in newsletters from. I used to be in it, saying that Qantas has relaunched mystery holiday trips, day trips, within Australia, which is decent enough distance to fly, right? Which is something they did in the 70s, just to get people to get used to getting on planes across states, rather than just getting in a Holden and off you go. But I'm wondering what have you? I know you reflect and learn a lot, but what might you have learned from being in Australia for a year about Australia, about the rest of, about differences, about similarities? I don't know.
I know. Well, it's really interesting. We always kind of thought of Australia as being one big, we are all Australian. And I think it's been quite apparent over this time that it's actually more like the United States of Australia. All of the different states have had a very different approach to how to handle the pandemic, and there's been a little bit of there's been a lot of borders being closed during this time, and other states not necessarily agreeing with that. So it's been really interesting to watch. So not only do we take it for granted, well, not take it for granted, but we're very, very grateful that we could leave the country on a regular basis. We couldn't even leave the state, and at some time when we were locked down, admittedly here in Sydney we only really had a fairly short period of time where we were locked down, that we couldn't leave our area. But even just like making it hard to travel between states is quite challenging as well. So it's really, it's given us some thought. I mean, obviously I do a lot of speaking. And so we've really got to think about that at the moment, because state borders keep getting closed on us at very short times. And then if there's a couple of cases that erupt, then our quarantine's very high over here, and then there's a lot of self-isolation that different states require at different times if you cross the borders. Some will just make a hard border close. So for us, and in terms of taking on client work, we're still needing to do a lot of things virtually for a very long time. I'm more than happy to do in-person work if it's within New South Wales. And so I think a lot of road trips are going to be coming up for workshops. We've already done quite a few road trips already. But that's really all we can kind of guarantee at the moment as far as being in person. So, I love doing things in person, and I know that it's starting to lift and starting to get a lot easier, but it's not as easy as we think because of these border closures. What happens if I'm away for work and then I have to self-isolate for 14 days when I get home? Or what happens if they close a border and I've got work booked in and I can't get there? So we've got to have all these kind of like contingency plans and different ways of going about things. So I think I'm pretty much just bound to New South Wales for a little bit, and we'll just see how the rest of the the next 6 to 12 months kind of plays out. But very grateful we can do all this via Zoom and all of that kind of thing, running workshops. And we've just really tailored. I saw something the other day which was around this idea of presenting now virtually. It's just a different room, when we go into it's just a different room setup, so whenever we speak, whenever a speaker goes into a room, we have a certain preference of how a room is set up, but we don't always get exactly the way that we like it. And so we kind of learn to roll.
I'm going to say, do you ever get it the way you like it?
Yeah, well, exactly. And they always forget the whiteboard, right? And so And so it's one of these things now where we're just like, and we've been lucky, like we've had clients in over 10 countries for a long time. So we're reasonably used to doing things virtually anyway. It wasn't like it was, oh my gosh, we really have to adapt quickly. But it is one of those things where it's like, it's just a different room, it's just a different room setup. So if we need to do it virtually, well, then we might change the time of the workshop. We might change the length. We might change, some of the structure, but, with some of the great platforms, we love using Zoom, and you've still got breakout rooms, you've still got whiteboards, you've still got so many of the great things that have made it easier. Group coaching has become more of a thing these days. People have needed to have just sessions where it's not necessarily new content. I just wrote a blog today. It's like, so many people don't need more content. They don't need more tools and more hacks. They need to implement what they already have. And so we've been doing a lot of these just 1 hour sessions with our clients just to go, hey, we've got the content, but how are we applying it in this situation? How are we applying it to everyone working from home? How are we now applying it? We're sort of going back a bit now because different states are at different stages of returning back to the office. And some people are not returning back to the office 5 days a week. In fact, a lot of people aren't. So now there's a lot of people who need help in, learning to apply a lot of our tools, but to a hybrid leadership situation. So how do you energize a team where you know that you're not going to have all of your team in the office 5 days a week like you were perhaps used to previously?
Yeah. I could go down a very general set of directions. However, I want to honor my guest. So tell us a little bit more, because obviously I know you, and we don't want it to be a private conversation because there'll be people listening on the podcast later and viewing this later. What is it that you and your team do? What are you all about?
Sure. So as the name suggests, and as you rightly said in the introduction, we love this concept of next evolution, and we love continuous improvement. We really love this idea of bringing a lot of the neuroscience, and neuroscience is something it's just grown exponentially in the last 10 years, and it's just going to keep growing exponentially. So we want to make sure that we are always tweaking and not necessarily revolutionizing everything, but always tweaking the way that we do things so that once we know better, we can do better. So we focus on, our tagline is you at your best always, and we help leaders and their teams to be that way. I used to work in corporate, as did my business partner, Alex, and we found that there was burnout was rife. It's only just been labeled an official syndrome by the International Classification of Diseases, but this has been around for a long time. Wasn't really talked about. Mental health problems have been an issue for a long time. Again, not really talked about. But it was one of those things that if people really know how to perform at their best, and the trick is, from a leadership perspective, we're not doing leadership 2010 anymore. That's just not good enough. We need leadership which is right up to the minute, which is around how do we coach our teams to be at their best always. That's when the magic happens. That's when you've got more creativity. That's where you have psychological safety for people to take risks and do their best work and not be afraid to make the odd mistake here and there. We need to encourage people to really, it's this idea around cognitive energy. So the more that we learn about the brain, the more that we understand that cognitive energy is absolutely your currency. And that's just kind of a fancy term for mental energy. But the more, it's really interesting, is now that we know that you've only really got, on average, around 4 hours. You can train it to about 6 hours. So we give all of our clients the benefit of the doubt that they're high performers. We'll give them 6 hours. But we think if we can really maximize 4 hours a day where you can knock it out of the ballpark as far as getting your heavy cognitive load done and using your heavy cognitive load to do your heavy cognitive work, then you can get so much more done in less time with less effort. So we focus on that from a productivity perspective. We get the easy stuff sorted with that. And then we focus on this idea of using a lot of these principles around neuroplasticity to manage cognitive energy really well, and to make sure that we're building neural pathways that are really conducive to performing at our best always.
So I know you've actually really got into studying this at an academic level, and hence some of the you're doing finishing a master's and stuff. I don't know where you find the energy from, but then I laugh when I say that out loud, because you
I know a
practice what you
few
preach.
tips, Tom. That's
You
okay.
practice what you preach. But I mean, simplifying neuroplasticity about the concept that we can sort of rewire the way we function neurologically and etc. Let's come back to your slogan. So if we go back to some simple beginnings, because I'd like people listening to this to come out with a couple of thoughts. The cognitive energy piece is really key, all right? Much like the one about when people, you talk about people can know, and this is, as you'll know this very basic piece of neuroscience, is that people can only hold a certain number of short thoughts in short-term memory at a time. And it's thought that the ranges are, I'm not too precise on this, in current thinking, they may have evolved it, but it was between sort of 6 and 14 as a natural state. Now, if you start out at 6 to 8, it changes as you get older. And as you get older, then what happens is then to be honest, you're more prone to things like memory loss and Alzheimer's and other things. If you start at a very low base, if you start at 14, you probably are way ahead of most of the pack through your 20s, 30s, 40s. By the time you hit your 50s and 60s, you just seem normal because you've dropped down. But the reason I mention that to people, I go, if the average is about 8, why are you trying to retain 20 different tasks in your head? Why don't you dump it into Evernote or something? Because you physically can't. So concentrate your load on the stuff that really matters. If we go back to the two thoughts I'd like to just talk about is, one, you say you at your best always. When I first started working with Alex, your colleague, Alex Davids, before I met up with you and the two of you paired up, it was around the concept she was taking from sports and performance, and the fact that we cannot fire on 100% all the time. And in corporate world, we expect people to do that. So that if you got burnout, I used to when I worked in another field and I was doing a lot of deals, you're paying lawyers, 800 US an hour, and they're trying to get you to reply to emails at midnight because they're doing 15-hour days. I'm going, I'm paying you for your cognitive ability, not to be a hamster on the wheel. I don't feel terribly confident I'm getting $800 an hour value if you're working 15 hours a day. But that used to be, it has changed a bit, but that was the way law firms were driven. I'm going, I don't get why they have these really bright people and they make them churn and burn. So one of the key pieces was what is best. Best always doesn't mean going at 100%. And the second of two thoughts is when you say to coach your teams, taking the sporting analogy, people when still to this day, if I say people, look, I'm the trained coach, and they'll say, what? So you tell people how to be better? I'm going, no, that's what a sports coach might do. But actually an elite sports coach helps you be your best self. They're not teaching you technique. So what do you mean by be at your best? And what do you mean by coaching teams? What if that's leadership 2021? What do you mean by coaching the teams to be at their best always?
Yeah, it's really about encouraging this idea of self-responsibility and accountability as well. It's like, I always hate this when I hear this thing of like, 50% or 80% or whatever it is of people leave bosses. It's like, well, yeah, maybe, but we should be coaching others to take responsibility, to stand up for what they need and how to do things and set boundaries and all of that kind of thing. So really good leadership will basically, instead of coaching others to motivate, or instead of motivating others, it becomes how do we coach others to motivate themselves, but how to manage themselves and all of this kind of thing. So to pick up on a few points there, to be at your best always, you're exactly right. We actually don't have to be like at 100% of the time. And that can still be at your best always. It's like, well, if I only need a lower level of cognitive energy right now, then I'm at my best for that right now. And that's okay. So it's helping people to use these athletic principles of periodization. People who are elite sports people, I know you're right into your swimming and your sons are very good with swimming. They don't train the same way every day. And so we need to help people to be able to structure their days, their weeks, their months, their years, so that they have that cognitive energy when they need it. And they're not trying to overdo things and over-engineer things when they don't need the cognitive energy. So I think that's a big part of that, being at your best always, is making sure that you're matching your cognitive energy to when you need it. And I totally agree with you with the law firms. It was, in just a funny little aside, when we were hiring our law firm to do all of our contracts and things like that, and anything that we need done, one of the things that I focused on was making sure that I hired people who said, and when I said to them, it's like, okay, knowing what I know about neuroscience, don't be working on my stuff at 10 o'clock at night unless you are genuinely a night owl and you've started work at 5, in which case knock yourself out. But other than that, it's like, knowing what I know, I don't want to be paying you for effectively 2 hours worth of work that should only be taking you 1. And our law firm's
and they
very
might
good at
make
that.
mistakes. And they might make mistakes.
Yeah,
So just to jump onto so we can
Exactly.
jump onto the piece around coaching, and you mentioned it's the approach to that around the business and the leader in the business helping people be self-responsible and accountable. The simple example, I use super simple, basic examples around this cognitive energy piece myself, having had training from Alex 8-9 years ago and developed it myself. But simple examples is like, if and you're absolutely right, different people have different styles, and this is where the new world of work will change when we come out of this pandemic. But like on a Friday afternoon, how much energy do you need, right? Well, if you're trying to do super concentrated, productive work and you work Monday to Friday, then if all you have to do is some simple diary tweaks and go, if you spend the last 3 hours of Friday just wrapping up your week and setting up for the next week, which is my personal style, right? I don't book any meetings on a Friday afternoon, right? Because I know I just haven't got any energy left. Right? I'm not at my the best I need for that moment is just enough that I can sit and process through ticking some boxes off. What did I get done? What's left, etc. But I'm pretty good on I actually, self-awareness is like, I took longer to get us into this conversation than I normally do, because I'm realizing 8 o'clock in the morning to engage in a conversation like this is not the same for me as 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I realized I've done a couple of interviews in Australia so far. But yeah, I just had this sudden out of body experience. So thank you for that awareness. And moving on to the coaching piece. So what's different for you? Because leadership is my underlying theme. What's different for you? What do leaders need to, what do you teach them? What do they understand differently about what do you mean by coaching the teams? And, how do you, if you want people to not be in this paradigm of crank it out 100% effort, 100% of the time, however many hours a day, and you want them to use their maximum cognitive ability and at the optimum times, there's often some behavior change needed in the people, but there's maybe behavior change needed in the leaders. So what sort of tips and ideas do you have?
Yeah, so there's 2 aspects of that. The leaders need to be walking the walk and talking the talk themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So if the leaders are walking around tired and exhausted, that's not overly overly inspiring for everybody else. And so they need to be doing this and being at their best when they need all of that cognitive energy as well. So the first step is making sure that they can really do it for themselves. The second part is creating the environment so they can coach others to learn how to do the same. So some people get us in to help with workshops on that as well, but they need to make sure that they're creating the space to do it. Now, the one thing that COVID's really done, which has been fantastic, is that a lot of the times when we're in the office, structure is kind of provided for you in a lot of ways. Whereas what's happening and what we're finding over COVID, and this is with all of our clients all over the globe, is that now people are in a position to kind of go, wow, I can really choose to structure my day a little bit more the way that I want to structure it, so that if I want to whip out and pick up the kids from school, for those that can actually pick their kids up from school at the moment, or let's take an example of, say, homeschooling. If you need to structure your days to factor those kind of things in, how do we help people to do that in a way that's actually quite tailored and quite bespoke? So there's none of our tools are around everybody should structure their days this way and that's for optimal performance for all, because no 2 brains are created the same. And so what we do is help people with the tools. All we need to get them to do is to now think about how are they going to apply those tools to themselves and to their specific situation. And I think the one thing that COVID has really taught us is that we have less structure given to us, and now that we've got more ability to implement that structure ourselves. So leaders are going to need to make sure that this whole idea of people need to be chained to the desk to be looking productive, that's so 1990 as far as I was concerned, but some people would still call that 2010.
Well, it's 2021 when Goldman Sachs is saying we'll all be back in the office by summer.
Yeah,
that's the talk they're talking is we expect you back in the office. So they're still in the 90s. Very quick thought from me is I started looking to propagate, all these hashtags, right? And people said work from home, WFH, and then they said remote. And I thought to myself, both of these words have an implication that the locus of work remains a physical location in the city.
Yeah.
So I started to use the term work from anywhere. And it's around the idea that if you take it top down, bottom up, is what does the business need? Because ultimately what the business needs is really important, because you have to have a thriving business so that people can have employment, they can have a place to do good work, etc. So within the construct of what does the business need, then look at every individual as an individual and say what works for them. And I think broad thinking now is that we're going to have all kinds of different areas. Some people are very comfortable working from home, right? But other people may want, if they live in a suburban town, which is a 1 hour commute each way, some bright spark might take a cafe that's gone out of business, unfortunately, take the space and make it a co-working space in that town. So if you want to get out of the house, because you feel better working out of the house, you might do that. And you might have the company takes less office space, actually gives you an allowance to work from home. Others work mornings, others work evenings and flexible hours. So when we look at all of that, I think sometimes the questions are as important as the answers. To kind of wrap up, if we're looking at individuals who previously were working in the office before, 5 days a week, etc., and the structure was given to them, let's just make the big leap that their company will allow them the freedom to make some choices. And that's not as big a leap as it might have thought to be a year ago. So there's a huge space opening up. It might be quite overwhelming to people to go, well, I have to structure my whole day and work it all out. What sort of questions can they ask of themselves so they understand themselves a bit better? And what are the sort of examples you might have seen? So how can we, if we picture some individuals, what can they be looking to do, assuming they're given the freedom to work from anywhere?
Yeah, that's right. And we've actually prepared an online course for this exact reason, to get people to start thinking about different questions that they can ask themselves to come up with their perfect structure. And it's things like, what are my 4 hours of power, as we call them? If what's your first most productive hour? What's your second most productive hour? They might be consecutive, they might be separate. It's completely up to your biorhythm. So keep a log. What are your 4 most productive hours in a day, and how do we learn how to protect them and make the most of them? What's your personal pace? So we look at that from an attention span point of view. Should you be working in shorter bursts, or should you be clearing the desk and focusing for longer periods of time? That's another one that's really, really useful to ask. What are the environments that you want to have around in terms of, say the introverts versus extroverts? So I actually structure my day, like I like to be around other people. So I actually go into the office 5 days a week, but generally for half a day each day. So I actually quite like to work from home. I tend to punch out a bit of study in the morning, and then I exercise at lunchtime, because that's my not my non-productive time, my least productive time. And then I get really productive from a really turbocharged afternoon. So I jump into my work clothes and I head to the office, and I do a lot of coaching and presenting in the afternoons. So it's really kind of like just everything's up for grabs. Question the ways that what is the best way for you to be able to do your best work? And leaders, ask the same question of your team. What infrastructure do you need to create so that they are in a position to be able to do their best work?
You've just reminded me of a line that I think encapsulates the kind of leadership we're looking for. And one of my early guests on this show was my friend Chip Conley. And He used to run a large hotel company. And the question he would ask any new hire was I'm not going to get this precise, but it was along the lines of, how can I help you do the best work of your life at this company? And I have a client who has tens of thousands of staff, and they they work in the language of building is not irrelevant to their business. And they say, what do you need and how can we build it for you? So that goes back to creating the space. And but yeah, that's those two questions. And I think there's a third one embedded in there, which is linked to the personal pace, because there are people who their personal style is they just want to lock the doors and work for those 4 hours at a time. And other people work in really short bursts. So that's, yeah, terrific. That's great. So these are questions people can ask of themselves. And yeah, I just wish for a world where people can, both the leaders and the companies can look at the fact that if you want people to be at their best always throughout their working week and working life over a longer period of time, then this is a time of opportunity. And you and I talked a lot more a few years ago as you were building the business, and there were plans for, we joked about global domination, so not just Australia. And I know you're doing more and more online and ability to scale things. I'm excited because I've got super energized as an ex-athlete myself. I got super energized by the concepts of performance that you and Alex and the team have been continuing to develop, and they've gone way further than what I learned. But I would recommend anybody looking at this to look up Next Evolution Performance, and Australia is not very far away, because we can always work online, and you can be sure that any of the team are so well trained that if you wanted them at any weird time of day, they would make sure they manage their performance so that, and not just with a cup of coffee leading up to it, so that they're absolutely firing on all cylinders, no matter what time of the day and night you need them
Exactly. We kind of manage the time zones according to the best time. So if it works out to be early morning Australia and New Zealand time, Alex does it. If it works out to be late night Australian or New Zealand time, then I do it.
And that's not the weird thing. Up in Europe, everything's like an hour away by flight or one time zone. And you're like in Sydney, she's in New Zealand, and you're kind of going, well, we've got a few time zones there we can play with, even though those are your next door neighbors. Okay, well, we've flew through half an hour. So as always, I'll just let you have the last word as we wrap up. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the future of what's next, I think it is really all around this cognitive energy optimization. If we can help people to do that, absolutely, they will, burnout will become a thing of the past, and that's a really exciting thing. People will be doing their best work. The neuroplasticity side, which we didn't get to talk about today, maybe we come back and do that another day, but that's another really exciting part. So the more that we can understand optimal brain function and how to really use that, that will really take things to the next level for businesses. So neuroplasticity is something to ignore at your peril, because it's happening, and probably to your detriment if you don't know how to self-direct it to the positive. And that is what my next 4 months of my dissertation is going to be on in my master's. What do leaders need to know about neuroplasticity? So I hope let's reconvene.
Reconvene in a few months. And I think you've just come up with a new definition of a CEO.
There you go.
Cognitive energy optimizer of the company.
I love that. Absolutely. Let's work with that.
So play with that. Many thanks, Vanessa, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you so much, Tom. Have a great day, and I look forward to speaking soon.